What is good, everybody? Juliana Page here. I am on a little staycation. This is the most amazing spot. It's called Lake Austin Resort and Spa, and it is just so beautiful here and such a special getaway because tomorrow is my birthday. So I always like to go to a place where I can just get away and have quiet time and really just reset and celebrate, another year and just really get clarity on what's next. And just have that quiet time. I'm not, it's just so important to me. So it's beautiful. It's right on the lake. There's all sorts of activities to do. There's this really sweet library, which I'm going to be writing in tomorrow. There's workshops and different activities to do. Amazing food. And lots of pools. Had an awesome spa treatment today. So just so many awesome things. So I'm in the cutest little room. I'm just like taking notes. I love apparently design, so I'm taking notes about this. But I wanted to pop on here and share because I did a workshop, and because this is also in my realm of expertise as well, it was nice to just sit and watch somebody else facilitate without them knowing who I am or what I do. So I wanted to share some takeaways with you because we really are in a time and a season where it's interesting when you think about relationships. And often when we think about relationships, there might just be one that you're thinking about, but we don't always reflect on or think through all the relationships that we have, which could really be important. So for example, we talked in the very beginning, when you think about relationships, we just brainstorm the relationships that you have in your life. Okay. So just think about them. And people were just popcorning. But what I found extremely interesting was nobody said God and nobody mentioned themselves. Right? Like, so I'm sitting there, again, fly on the wall in the experience, but also observing. And I'm like, those are my first two, God and self, right? Because love the Lord God with all your heart and then love your neighbor as yourself. So if you don't have those right, how can you expect any of your other relationships, even in a pandemic, to function? Doesn't make sense. So at any rate, what's going well and why in relationships, and then what's challenging and why. So here's some of the ones that people came up with. Their partner, their spouse, family, friends, coworkers seem to be a big one. Teammates, it could be mentor-mentee, it could be clients, but these were some of the relationships that were coming up. So after we did a brainstorm about that, and that's what I would invite you to do, is just create your own list. Like literally get out a piece of paper and just on the piece of paper, write down all of the relationships that you are participating in, all of the relationships that are active in your life, and then even make a list of the ones that you want, right? And then I would say scale it. So on a scale of 1 to 10, what's going well and where's the room for improvement? And then also what's challenging and why? So really just take an inventory of what relationships are challenging. Where are you having a hard time? And just have that as a assessment as we go through this next part, which are relation tips, okay? So the main takeaway, which we got there, thank goodness, is that you always work on yourself before you work on the relationship. Now, I don't know if you're in a partnership, if you're in a marriage, if you want to be in one, but you've always got to work on yourself before the relationship. And a lot of times we get it twisted. We want to work on the relationship. We want to work on the other person. We want to figure that all out, but we haven't done any of the self-work. And why this is important, because we all have habits and tendencies and insecurities and patterns and communication styles and personality types that are reacting and responding and engaging with each other when you're in relationship, right? So with that in mind, it's also important to note that all relationships are mirroring something back to you. They're not always a mirror. They're not always a direct reflection, but they are showing you something. Like literally when you look in the mirror, it's reflecting something back at you. And that's what a relationship does. It reflects something back at you for you to look at. So when you think about relationships that you're in, what's going well, think about what the different relationships are reflecting back to you. If a relationship is going well, pay attention to what you're sowing into it, or why might that be going well, because that's good feedback. But on the flip side, relationships that are challenging or not going as well as you expected, same thing. What are they mirroring back to you? What is the opportunity? Where's the lesson? Where can you pivot? Where can you make some adjustments to grow or evolve to a better, more healthy place? Super good question. Okay, so we grow most in relationship, which is the interesting thing. I love that this woman facilitating said this on tonight, that relationships really are the fast track to transformation and growing in really positive ways. Of course, they could be a fast track to negative too if you're just going in them blind and they're not healthy. But we grow most in relationship because they're reflecting something back to us. If we're just on our own, not learning anything, right? Not getting feedback, right? Not having to be vulnerable, we're not really learning and we're not really growing. So relationships teach us that. Okay. So the first tip, is know yourself. And I loved this because if you've all been watching me for a minute, I preach on self-mastery. This is what I teach. I really believe that that is the call. We would really see a lot of change in the world if we learn how to master ourselves. Don Miguel Ruiz also has a really good book. He wrote The Love Languages. No, he didn't. He wrote The 4 Agreements. The Love Languages is a good book, but not the one I'm thinking of. But Don Miguel Ruiz wrote a book called The 4 Agreements. But he also wrote one called The Mastery of Self, which is really great too, to give you an idea of what all does that mean. Super powerful. But knowing yourself, we have to know what it is that we need, what it is that we are called to do, who we are. So having a strong sense of identity and purpose, we need to know what we're aspiring to become, where we're headed, like where are you driving to, right? Before anybody partners with you, where are you going? What have you been put on this earth to do? That's something that is really important to know, because unless you know what you need, unless you know what you want, what you desire, what you're working towards, you can't communicate that with anybody else. And it's very likely that you'll partner with people that don't mesh well or align well with you because you're not clear either. So for example, in that case, some of those relationships could be reflecting back to you what you don't want so that you can be uber clear on what it is that you don't want. Super uncomfortable probably and really challenging, but they're still a gift for what they're giving you or what they're holding up for you. So we have to know what it is that we want and what we need and what we're feeling so that we can communicate. And that's mutual, right? So sometimes women are really good at that. Not that men aren't, but often women do more of that kind of work. They take more time to reflect and get centered and do those kind of activities. Not again that men don't, but it's just been common. So now that men are becoming more conscious in that way too, there's a lot of change. But you really want to look for someone that is going to hang around for a while and help you unpack, because we all have baggage. We do. And particularly likely the older you are, the more baggage that you've had, because the more life experiences that you've walked through, the more trauma, the more pain, the more hurt, right? The more good too, right? But there's more to process there. So you want somebody that can hang around and process that with you, or really just unpack it with you. So not doing your work for you and not fixing you, because that is not it at all, but unpacking, like being there and hanging out with you and getting to see you navigate through life. They can hang out for that. Okay, so there's another really good book that was referenced. I am going to get it. You don't have to be married for this, but I just think it's so powerful, even just this concept, how to improve your marriage without talking about it. And I don't really know what this book is about because I haven't read it, but I am drawn to it because I know the power of the prophetic, right? And our words create worlds. And so we would do a lot of service to our relationships if we didn't talk about all the issues. Sometimes we just need to be silent. Sometimes we just need to be connected, because if you're not connected and then you try to go in and solve a problem, you make a hot freaking mess. So it's the difference between knowing when to bring up something when the time is right to do that, and talking about it then when you've got cool, level-headed people versus in the heat of a moment when you just want to react or like let the other person have it, it usually doesn't go well. Okay, so the next one is, other than know yourself, the next one is learn to respond rather than react. I've heard this before, you probably have too, but it's worth repeating. We very rarely are ever present in the moment when we're reacting. We're either caught up in the past and how something happened and keeping our record of wrongs, or we're tripping about the future and how we're freaked out about it, but we're not present in the moment in such a way that we can be deeply here with another human holding space for them and respond versus react. Huge difference. And in a pause, right, is where there's freedom, because there's the quote, life is 90% how you respond. It's 10% what happens to you and 90% how you respond. So that should give you some context about what you can be learning and what you can be practicing so that you can really have healthy relationships, okay? So that is huge. Learn how to respond rather than react. That's number 2. Number 3, maintain some kind of centering practice. So I got to share the daily 5 in there, which was profound to the humans that were in this workshop, which is great. But essentially having some sort of centering practice, whether that's spending time in the Word, highly recommend, whether it's just getting some time away to journal and write down even your prayer request or just have a brain dump. There's a book that I love by Julia Cameron called The Artist's Way. I remember when I was in grad school having a hard time getting centered, having a hard time slowing down, just having a hard time just being present and not tripping about the future, right? So that book taught you just to write what she calls the morning pages, and you just brain dump all of these pages. I think it's 3 nonstop, and you don't reread it. You just get it out, because essentially all of that is blocking you before you even go about your day. And it was mind-boggling how much stuff that I would write every day. And I eventually evolved to a place where I was tired of writing the same things. And that was revolutionary, because you start to realize what it is that you do want to focus on and the story that you do want to write versus what you want to rehearse every day. So powerful. So I recommend that. But maintaining some sort of centering practice, for some it might be meditation, whatever it is for you, it does so much for you. So one, having a space, you don't need a ton of space for this. I've done it in a closet before. I've done it in really small apartments before. Now I have a whole room and space dedicated to it. But there's something about going back to the same place every day. And there's something sacred and energetic about that space and what is created there. It's really, really important to have that practice, but it will train you to be present. It will also rewire you. So you'll be wired for peace and for stillness. And that's so important because you carry that with you. And then if you are practicing that, you have that to give and to bring to different situations. So it'll help you, for example, respond versus react, because you practice. You can practice being a part of an experience, but not having to be all up in it. You can observe it and then respond versus be in it and react, okay? So living in the present is what allows you to live your best life. This is really profound. This woman mentioned a story about how she was coaching one of her clients who happened to be 85, and he really was reflecting on his life and thinking about time and wanting to make the most of his time and really thinking about how he can live his best life. And what he came up with in their working together was that you can live your best life by just being present in every moment of life. That's living your best life, which is so simple, right? But look at so many people that you know. It's even now when we're working from home or we're readjusting, there's so much busyness even now. There's so much distraction. There's so much noise even now. But living in the present, right? Being here for it, for real, and deeply involved in it, right? Vulnerable to the moment even, is what allows you to live your best life, because you don't miss a moment. A lot of times we're in moments, but we're not present, so we miss it. So an example would be when you meet people, how often do you actually remember their name? A lot of times we don't remember names because we're not present when somebody's introducing themselves. So we just don't remember. But when you're present, it's interesting. You'll start to remember names. You'll start to remember those moments. Okay. If you can respond to, this is a self-check. If you can respond to criticism or praise in a neutral way, then you're doing good. Okay. So think about that. When you think about having a centering practice, that allows you to stay in a neutral, in a peaceful state, right? I call it the peace that surpasses all understanding, a supernatural peace. God gives you that kind of peace, right? But it comes from being in relationship with God. It comes from seeking God. It comes from getting in God's word. It comes from centering in and aligning with God, right? That he rewires you because you're transformed by the renewing of your mind, and he just literally rewires you from the inside out just from spending time. Wild. Do it. Okay. But you can tell how different. Maybe some people don't notice because it's not always an outside transformation, but you can tell how well you're doing with your practice if you can respond to criticism or praise in a neutral way. So what does that mean? When you get criticism, does it eat you alive? Do you internalize it? Do you freak out? Do you ruminate about it? Do you want to clap back? Like, what happens when you get criticism? Usually if we have critical parents, we don't like criticism. We avoid it. We freak out when we get it. But that's not going to be the case if you're doing your work. Same thing with praise though. Some people can't receive praise or a compliment or anything. Like if you tell them they look beautiful or if you compliment them, they can't receive it. So being neutral, being able to receive, but not internalize, right? Or get that out of context is how you really know that that centering practice is going well for you. Okay, next one. Number 4, allowing time in stillness and silence. This is so, so important. I know that I used to be somebody that would run from that. It freaked me out. I felt this pressure to always be doing, to always be achieving, to always have something to do, a full calendar. And so when the calendar changed, right? Like take moving across the country and starting over. In the very beginning, you don't have a lot on your calendar. So those times of just being alone in a new place by yourself and just that silence and that stillness, that could feel overwhelming, right? But over time, I've grown to love it, which is why I'm at this beautiful resort, taking in silence and stillness and just getting downloads of wisdom and revelation and just in my happy place. It's wild, but that can tell you that allowing time in stillness and silence, what it does is it really helps you to reflect. It helps you to connect with nature, which is always really healing. And it allows you to practice reverence, which reverence is like there's a sacredness to it. There's an awe. There's a honor for what's happening. It's just, you just are still, you're present, you're aware. So for example, being out on the lake, there was this big heron that flew by and it was really majestic and everybody just stopped and watched and was totally silent and in reverence. So the more you practice that, the more you can honor yourself, the more you can honor other people, the more you can just show up very differently. And there's a saying that's this: unless you can improve the silence, don't say anything. Stay silent. So a lot of times we're just adding to noise and it's not necessary. So it really helps you when you pull back for a minute, when you can think about what you're thinking about, when you can process through what you're feeling, when you can just reflect on your life and what's going on in it. There's so much perspective and just clarity that can come, but it only comes when you're still. That's why there's also the word be still and know. There's a knowing that comes. Okay. Next one is if you can admit, this is another self-check. If you can admit when you're wrong and stay silent when you're right. That's how you know that you're really improving in your relationship. So this is a self-check. Can you admit when you're wrong and can you stay silent when you're right? So a lot of times we want to defend ourselves. We want to create an excuse. We want to avoid being wrong. And then the other thing we'll do is when we're right, we'll be like, see, I told you, right? And we'll like get on somebody's case about it. So if you can admit when you're wrong and stay silent when you're right, there's so much progress. Like legitimately, watch what happens when in your relationships, they will improve. Watch what happens. If you can admit when you're wrong and apologize for that, right? And course correct without being offended or any of that. And then if you can stay silent when you're right, just watch what will happen. Okay, so the next one, learn to listen. Listening and silence are actually, so listen and silent are the same letters. Did you know that when you write out the word, listen and silent are the same letters. So they're really connected, but you're silent when you're listening and you're present when you're listening. Particularly when there's conflict, this is really, really important. But listen so deeply that you're actually changed by what you hear. Don't listen to come up with whatever it is that you want to say. Listen so deeply that you're changed by what you hear. So, so important. Okay. The next one is ask the right questions, be curious and listen. Conflict and crisis are actually an opportunity. So crazy. So crazy. Think about that. Whenever there's a conflict, whenever there's a crisis, there's an opportunity there. It is. It's introducing something new. So there's a new way to respond. There's a new way to show up. There's a new way to move forward, to grow, right? So there's opportunity there. Okay, when you're in relationship, this is also important. Maintain eye contact. Right? Especially when we're wearing masks and you can't even see somebody's like bottom portion, you've got to maintain eye contact because those are the windows of your soul. And it's what actually builds intimacy. It's what builds connection. It's what allows you to be safe and relatable. So if you're not making eye contact, if you just walk around with a mask on, and don't make eye contact, that's sending a message. But if you want relationship, if you want connection with people, maintain the eye contact. So building on the stillness and silence, another one is practice the pause. Practice the pause. Choose your words carefully and with intention. Don't say anything about anyone you wouldn't want to say in front of them. I remember hearing this probably in elementary school, but there was a lot of catty, petty stuff going on at that age. And I just remember thinking about that. I don't want to say something that I'm now going to see somebody else say that I said. Do you know what I mean? Like, I want to make sure that if I have something to say, I can say it to the person directly and I can say it in front of them. I don't want all of this gossip and behind the scenes because it just gets really messy. So a safeguard is three things. Is it true? Is it necessary? And is it kind? If it doesn't pass all three of those, then you don't need to say it. You don't need to say it. So practice the pause. It'll really allow you to practice responding versus filling that gap. We always feel like we need to fill this gap, but you don't have to. Practice the pause and watch what happens. Okay. This one is so good. Identify and express what you're grateful for in relationships. So practice mindful giving. And whatever you focus on expands, right? So what we focus on grows more in our life. We've heard that. So focusing on gratitude and focusing on giving can only enhance your relationship rather than focusing on what you're not getting and focusing on what you want and what you need all the time and what you need this person to do for you. Two very different ways of showing up. Okay? So identify and express what it is that you're grateful for. And practice mindful giving and watch what that does to your relationship. There's this gentleman, I think he's a relationship expert. I forget the context, but he wrote a book and it's about, his name is John Gottman, but he wrote this book on relationships. And he said, you can really tell when a relationship is going to fail if it has these things: contempt, criticism, defensiveness, and stonewalling. So if your relationship is made up of all of that, you don't have intimacy, you don't have reverence, you don't have silence and stillness, you don't have honor, you don't have good communication, it's really going south and fast. So for example, anytime there's contempt, there needs to be 5 positive things that are said. Like probably like you heard in elementary school, right? If you give somebody 1 negative comment, you got to give them 5 to make up for it, right? So think about that and how powerful your words are. the word of God will tell you how strong they are. It literally says the power of life and death is in your tongue. So what we say is cutting. That whole sticks and stones and may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Lies. They absolutely can. Okay. And expressing what we're grateful for is a blessing. So think about it. Whenever somebody's expressed gratitude to you, how did that make you feel? How did that shift you? So powerful. Be aware of the intentions you have and where they're coming from. So when you're giving, is it mindful, intentional giving to just bless this person, or is it to get something? Check your motive there. And then give from overflow, not to get. That's super important. So all of these to say, this is an invitation to take an honest inventory of how you're doing in relationship and to take radical ownership of how you're going to create change in relationship, starting with yourself. So there's a quote by Thomas Merton, and it's something along the lines of, love is our true destiny, and it's not something that we find on our own. It's something that we find together with each other. So keep that in mind. Relationships are so valuable. They're life-giving. They're meant to be a blessing. But also, as you probably know, the wrong relationships can really cause a lot of hurt to your life. So my encouragement as I'm in this beautiful retreat about to reflect on another year is to also reflect on your relationship, particularly your relationship with God, your relationship with self, and then your relationship with others, and where you personally can make adjustments to move towards the vision that you have for those. All right, guys, I hope this message blessed you. If you did find that it did bless you, make sure that you subscribe to the channel and copy the link and share it with a friend. And if you are interested too in self-mastery, in coaching, and the power of this kind of work, you can visit julianapage.com. I've got several different coaching packages over there. There is a self-paced self-mastery course that is really powerful. I wish I would have had that in my hands when I was probably even just in high school. But it's so powerful just to go through that. If you haven't asked yourself some really deep questions, or if you haven't done a lot of this inner work, it is so powerful to actually sit down and make that space to do it. And sometimes you need a little guidance. So check that out. And you can also follow me over on Instagram at Miss Juliana Page. All right, guys, until next time, stay blessed.